Welcome back to fordeetv. I'm your host, 4O. Today I put together a tutorial on working with curves inside of Adobe Photoshop. I'm using CS6, however, these techniques still apply to earlier versions of Photoshop. I have an image loaded inside of Photoshop right now of my dog Bandit. I'm going to go ahead and apply an adjustment layer, curves. To do so, I can come down to the Layers palette, click on the adjustment layer icon, and select curves. I know it's outside of your screen, but it's approximately the 6th one down. Otherwise, I can come up here to the Adjustments Layers window and select Curves. When I apply this, it applies my adjustment layer on top of the layer I had selected in the Layers panel. Let's go over the options here located in the Curves dialog box. In here you see a histogram. This histogram represents the luminosity of the image, over here being black and over here being white. We can adjust the graph by Alt or Option clicking on the graph. When we do that, this doesn't give you an additional point to snap to. It's just for visual purposes. Over here in the top left of your dialog box, you have the curves selected. This right button right here selects the mask for this curves layer. Currently there's no mask selected, so everything you do in the curves dialog box is going to affect the whole image. Within here, there are presets. You can cycle through the presets, for example, to apply a colored negative or to apply a cross process or darken your image, etc. I'm going to go ahead and go back up to default. If I wanted to adjust localized contrast values, I would click on this button. When I click on this button, it allows me to sample a color within the image, let's say the white here in my dog. If I lower this button, you'll see that it's added a point where that was in the graph, and it's dragged it down. I'm going to go ahead and press Command-Z on my keyboard to undo. Let's say I wanted to darken the brightness in his eyes. As I drag this eyedropper over different colors, you'll notice that inside the graph there's a button, excuse me, not a button, but a ball moving up and down that line. When I find something that I want to brighten, I can click, and as I drag up, you notice it's affecting that portion of the graph. Let's say I did not want to increase the brightness and the highlights. I can add another point by clicking in the graph and dragging down. To toggle what I've just done, I can click on this eyeball right here. So I'm going to go ahead and undo and go back to where we started from. Over here within the dialog box, you'll see that you can set your black point here by clicking on this button and selecting what would be black in your image. Let's say here. I can set my white point by looking for something that's white in the image and clicking. Notice it's making changes inside of the curve dialog box based on your selections. Before and after, I'm going to go ahead and undo what I did. Right now, we are drawing within the curves layer because we have this selected. Not drawing, but adding points. These points can be added at any point by going ahead and clicking and dragging. I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did. You could see the reason you didn't see an update in your screen when I added this is because the eyeball is off. If I go ahead and turn it back on, we can see that we've just increased our contrast with what they call an S-curve. It's a smaller S-curve, but it looks like an S. This basically darkens the darks and brightens the whites to increase the contrast between dark and light. Alternatively, I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did. You can draw in your curves adjustments by selecting this button here. So let's say I wanted to draw in the S-curve. I could come up and notice it's a little bit jagged of a line. The button below it allows you to smooth that line out. If I click it a few times, this line becomes fairly smooth, and it totally changes the way the image looks. Alternatively, this draw tool will allow you to do some very custom things within your photos to get some really crazy psychedelic effects. For example, if I draw an upside or a U, for example, it gives me a pretty psychedelic effect. Let's say I draw out I don't know if this would be considered an N. Now once I make these drawings, I can smooth out my drawing by clicking on this button right here. I'm going to go ahead and undo what I did. Typically, curves are used to increase the contrast of your image. If I switch back over here to the points tool, I can tell you usually you're going to find a port in your darks where you're going to drag them down to your taste, and you're going to increase your brights right here. If I go ahead and collapse the properties of the curves and show and hide the eyeball, you'll see that I've increased the overall contrast of the image. Curves can also be used to adjust color. I'll open up the properties here, and I'll go ahead and switch. Right now we're looking at the RGB values of this image, which mean all the colors within the image. I can switch just to the red, so if I wanted to increase red in the midtones, I can click here and drag this up. You notice that the image has all of a sudden gotten extremely red. If I go ahead and come back over here to the blue, and I pull the blue down, and maybe increase the green, maybe not so much. Once I have a point selected, I can go ahead and press up and down on the keys on the keyboard to make fine adjustments. You can notice the adjustments here down in the input and the output sections. I'm incrementing by 1 here. If I hold shift, it'll increment by, it looks by 13. So if I bring this back down, I increase my red even more. Now I've got somewhat of a sepia look. Let's go ahead and undo what I've done. We'll switch back over to the RGB channel, draw on a contrast curve that affects this image. To increase our control of what we want to adjust with this curves adjustment layer, we can apply a mask. If we go over here in the properties of this dialog box and click on the mask icon, it switches over to the mask for this curves adjustment layer. Right now it's entirely white. What that means is it's going to affect everything in the image. If we wanted to draw in a mask, we could do that by going ahead and selecting our brush, making sure that this mask is selected, and then switching to black. If we switch to black, it's going to not affect whatever is in black. So let's say I draw a circle around his face. I can come back over into the properties of the curves layer and see that in the mask section there's a black dot where I drew over his face. I can increase the feather so it softens the edges of this particular brush, switch back over to my curves dialog, and just to show you exactly what's happening, I'm going to really exaggerate this. So as I pull this down, you'll see that this is not affecting his face because we drew in a mask to say do not affect this portion of his face. Let me undo this a little bit, bring it back to something normal. I'm going to go ahead and select this mask here, press X on my keyboard to swap my foreground and background color, and press Option Delete. That fills my mask with white again, so the mask is now affecting the whole image. Inside of this mask, I can also select a color range. So let's say I wanted to just select a portion of this image, like his white hair, okay? Right now, the selection preview is set to grayscale. I can say no selection preview, set it to grayscale, black matte, white matte, etc. Whenever I click on a color in this image, this is what I'm planning to adjust with the mask. So maybe I want to affect all the black. So I click somewhere in his face, or the dark, I mean. I click on OK. I switch back. Now if I exaggerate it, you see that this is just affecting the sampled colors that I selected in the mask. I'm going to go ahead and press undo. Come back over to the curves dialog box, select the mask, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill it with white. I'll switch back over the curves dialog box. Let's say I had a color cast because I shot this indoors with fluorescent lighting and there was a green tinge. I could switch over to my green channel and I can pull the green out of the image. Let's say that it's really bright outside during daylight. There's too much blue. I can also pull some blue out of the image, right? Right now, these images do not suffer, or this image does not suffer from that issue, but I could do that, and that's a common use of curves as well. If I switch back over, let's say I like this S-curve, and I want to save it. I can come up here to the options and say Save Curves Preset. Let's call this Bandit Contrast. I'll go ahead and click on Save. I'll close this dialog box. I'll switch over to another image here I have loaded up. I'll apply a curves layer by clicking here in the adjustments window. And then I'll come up here to the menu and say Load Curves Preset. When I say Load Curves Preset, it has that preset I just saved. I'll go ahead and say open, and boom, it applied it. So if I'm looking for uniform contrast across images that were shot in the same location, lit in the same way, I can save curve presets and apply them. Again, you can use curves to adjust color, modify local contrast by selecting a point in your image, or increase or decrease the overall contrast of an image. Hope you liked today's tutorial, guys. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Please rate, subscribe, favorite, etc. Catch you next time. I'm out.